My name is Elena Martinez. I'm 31 years old. And the night I sat at my mother-in-law's dinner table, pretending I didn't speak Spanish, I heard my husband and his mother planning my destruction in excruciating detail. They talked about me like I was an obstacle to remove, like I was nothing more than an inconvenient problem standing between them and my inheritance. They laughed about how stupid I was, how trusting, how easy it had been to fool the gringa who fell in love with their lies. I understood every single word, and I smiled through the entire meal while my world burned down around me. Let me tell you how a woman who grew up speaking perfect Spanish in her abuela's kitchen in Texas became invisible at her own family dinner. Let me tell you how that invisibility saved my life and destroyed theirs. Before I tell you exactly what I heard that night, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there, who's listening to this story, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here. This is the kind of story you need to hear, the kind that reminds you to trust your instincts, to pay attention to the details, to never let anyone make you feel crazy for questioning what doesn't make sense. You know that feeling when you realize you've been living in a carefully constructed lie, when you discover that the person sleeping next to you every night has been playing a role so perfectly that you never suspected the performance. That's where I was 3 months ago, married for 4 years to a man I thought I knew, a man I thought loved me, a man who was actually counting down the days until he could cash in on my death. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I thought I had the perfect marriage, the perfect life, the perfect future. I met Carlos Reyes 5 years ago at a charity gala in Dallas. I was there representing my family's commercial real estate company. My father had built Martinez properties from nothing, and when he died suddenly 2 years before I met Carlos, he left everything to me, his only child, his princess, as he used to call me. $20 million in assets, property holdings across Texas, and a thriving business that I was determined to grow in his honor. Carlos was there with his mother, Isabella Reyes, who owned a small chain of Mexican restaurants in the area. He was charming, handsome, attentive. He spoke perfect English with just enough accent to be intriguing. He made me laugh. He made me feel seen. He told me his father had died when he was young, that he understood what it meant to lose a parent, to carry on their legacy. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, he proposed. And exactly 1 year after we met, I married Carlos Reyes in a beautiful ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. Red flag number 1 that I completely ignored. Carlos insisted on a small, intimate wedding. Just close family, he said. My family's very private, he explained. They don't like big displays. I thought it was sweet, romantic even. I didn't realize he was keeping me separated from his extended family for a reason. Red flag number 2. He suggested I add his name to all my accounts right after the wedding. For simplicity, he said. So I can help manage things, he explained. You're so busy with the company, you need support. I did it because I loved him, because I trusted him, because that's what married couples do, right? They share everything. Red flag number 3, he wanted to move in with his mother after the wedding. Just temporarily, he promised. She's getting older, she needs family close by, and it would mean so much to her. I agreed because I wanted to be a good daughter-in-law, because family was important to me too. I thought we'd be there for 6 months maximum. We're still there. 4 years later, we're still living in Isabella Reyes's sprawling house in North Dallas, in the guest wing that Carlos assured me would feel like our own private space. It never did. For the first year of our marriage, everything seemed perfect on the surface. Carlos was attentive, loving, constantly telling me how lucky he was to have found me. Isabella was welcoming, always cooking elaborate meals, treating me like the daughter she never had. I threw myself into the business, growing Martinez properties, making deals, honoring my father's legacy. But somewhere around year 2, things started to shift in ways so subtle I almost didn't notice. Carlos started spending more time helping his mother with her restaurants. That makes sense, I told myself. He's supporting his family business. He started taking more phone calls in Spanish, leaving the room when his phone rang. He's talking to suppliers, I reasoned. Restaurant business stuff I wouldn't understand anyway. He started being less interested in my business updates. I'd come home excited about a new property acquisition, and he'd barely look up from his phone. I'd try to discuss expansion plans, and his eyes would glaze over. You're the businesswoman, he'd say. I trust your judgment completely. I thought he was being supportive. I didn't realize he was simply waiting. Isabella started making subtle comments about my appearance. In English. Always in English when I was around. You know, mija, Carlos always liked women with more curves. You're working too much, you're getting too thin. American women, they forget to take care of their bodies. I'd laugh it off, try to eat more at her dinners, not realizing she was planting seeds of inadequacy. The intimacy between Carlos and me deteriorated. We went from making love 3 or 4 times a week to maybe twice a month. He was always tired, always stressed about the restaurants. I was always exhausted from work. Classic marriage stuff, right? Happens to everyone. That's what I told myself anyway. Before I continue, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And if this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. About 8 months ago, I started noticing financial irregularities. Small things at first. A few $1,000s moving from our joint account to accounts I didn't recognize. When I asked Carlos about it, he said it was for restaurant supplies, emergency repairs, nothing to worry about. I believed him because the amounts were small enough not to alarm me. Then the amounts got bigger. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. I confronted him more firmly and he got defensive. You don't trust me? After everything I do to support you, I'm handling my mother's business and you're questioning every dollar like I'm some kind of thief? He made me feel guilty for even asking. He made me feel like the villain for wanting transparency in my own financial life. I started keeping closer track after that. I created a spreadsheet, monitored every transaction. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Over the past year, nearly $400,000 had been transferred from our accounts to various accounts in Carlos and Isabella's names. $400,000 of my inheritance, my father's legacy, gone. When I confronted Carlos with the spreadsheet, he exploded. He accused me of being controlling, of not trusting him, of treating him like a child instead of a husband. His mother got involved, crying about how she'd always treated me like family, and now I was accusing her precious son of theft. They both made me feel like I was the problem, like my need for financial accountability was somehow an attack on their honor, their family, their love. I backed down. I apologized. I told myself maybe I was being too controlling, too suspicious. Maybe this was just how marriage worked. You had to compromise, had to trust, had to let go of some control. I was so stupid, so incredibly, painfully stupid. 3 months ago, Isabella announced she was having a special family dinner. She'd invited Carlos's aunt and uncle from Mexico, cousins I'd never met, extended family who were visiting for the week. She said it would be a traditional Mexican dinner, lots of Spanish conversation, lots of catching up with family members who didn't speak English well. You won't understand much of it, mija, she said to me with that smile that I'd once thought was warm, but now recognize as condescending. But it'll be nice for you to meet the family anyway. Just smile and nod, and I'll translate the important parts for you. Here's what Isabella Reyes didn't know about me. Here's what Carlos never bothered to learn in all our years together, because he was too busy performing his role as the devoted husband to actually get to know his wife. My mother's name was Maria Elena Garcia. She grew up in San Antonio, Texas, in a Mexican-American family that spoke Spanish at home and English everywhere else. When she married my father, David Martinez, a third-generation Mexican-American whose family had been in Texas since before it was Texas, she made sure I grew up bilingual. Every summer of my childhood, I spent with my abuela in her small house in San Antonio. She only spoke Spanish, no English, ever. If I wanted to communicate with her, if I wanted her stories and her love and her incredible cooking, I had to speak her language. So I did. I spoke Spanish as fluently as I spoke English. I could switch between the two without even thinking about it. But here's the thing. I'm light-skinned. My father's family had been mixing with Anglo-Texans for generations. I have my mother's Mexican features, but my father's light complexion. My last name was Martinez, but I looked ambiguous enough that people often couldn't place my ethnicity. And when I introduced myself as Elena Martinez, wife of Carlos Reyes, heiress to Martinez properties, they assumed I was Anglo. They assumed I was a white girl who'd married into a Mexican family without understanding the language or culture. I never corrected them. Why would I? My Spanish was my own business. My connection to my mother and grandmother was private, personal. It didn't need to be performed for anyone. Carlos had seen me speak Spanish exactly twice in our entire relationship. Once at our wedding, when I said my vows, and once at my grandmother's funeral, when I delivered the eulogy. Both times he seemed surprised, but he never asked about it afterward. He never asked if I was fluent, if I used it regularly, if I understood when he spoke it. He just assumed. They all just assumed. And that assumption was about to cost them everything. The night of the family dinner arrived on a Friday in late September. I came home from the office around 6, exhausted from a long day of negotiations. Isabella's house smelled incredible, that combination of spices and roasted meat that meant she'd been cooking for hours. Carlos greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek, already dressed for dinner in nice slacks and a button-down shirt. "You're home," he said. "Good. Get changed quickly. Everyone's already here, and Mama's almost ready to serve." I went upstairs to our room, changed into a nice dress, touched up my makeup. When I came back down, the dining room was full of people. Isabella introduced me to everyone, rapid-fire names and relationships I couldn't quite follow. Everyone smiled politely, said hello in heavily accented English, then immediately switched back to Spanish amongst themselves. I smiled. I nodded. I took my seat next to Carlos at the large dining table and accepted the plate Isabella put in front of me. The conversation flowed around me in Spanish, everyone talking and laughing and catching up. I ate my food and pretended not to understand a word. And that's when I started listening. Really listening. Not to participate, but to observe. To understand what was being said when they thought I couldn't comprehend. For the first hour, it was normal family stuff. Talk about the cousin's trip from Mexico, updates on various family members, discussion of the restaurants and how business was going. I ate my food, smiled when people looked at me, played the role of the outsider who didn't speak the language. Then Isabella brought out another round of drinks. Tequila for the adults, expensive stuff from her personal collection. Everyone toasted to family, to health, to prosperity. The conversation got louder, more animated, and people got less careful. Carlos's Aunt Mariana, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes, leaned toward Isabella and said something that made my blood run cold. "So when do you think it'll happen?" she asked in Spanish. "You've been waiting long enough." Isabella glanced at me, saw me staring blankly at my plate, and smiled. "Soon," she said. "Maybe 6 months, maybe less if we can arrange it properly." "Arrange what?" Mariana pressed. "What's the plan?" And that's when Carlos spoke up. My husband. The man I loved. The man I'd shared my life and my fortune with. He leaned back in his chair, swirled his tequila, and said in perfect, casual Spanish, "An accident. Something that can't be traced back to us. Maybe a break-in gone wrong, maybe a car accident. We're still working out the details." The table went quiet. Everyone was listening now. I kept my eyes on my plate, my face neutral, my breathing steady. Inside, I was dying. Inside, my heart was shattering into a million pieces. But outside, I was just the gringa wife who didn't understand Spanish, politely eating her dinner while the adults talked. "You're serious?" Uncle Javier said. "You're actually going to do it?" "What choice do we have?" Carlos said. "She's got everything in her name. The properties, the accounts, the business. Even with my name on the accounts, I can only access so much. If she dies, everything goes to me as her husband. $20 million in assets minimum, and I've already set up the accounts to transfer everything to offshore holdings the moment I inherit. The IRS will never see a dime." Isabella nodded approvingly. "My smart boy," she said, "just like your father would have wanted." I nearly dropped my fork. His father. The father who supposedly died when Carlos was young. The father he'd bonded with me over because we'd both lost parents. Was that a lie, too? Was anything about this man real? "What about suspicion?" Cousin Rosa asked. "Won't people investigate when she dies so suddenly?" Carlos laughed. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before, but this time it was cruel, cold, nothing like the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with. "Please," he said. "I've been the devoted husband for 4 years. Everyone knows how much I love her. I go to her office events. I support her business. I play the perfect partner. When she dies, I'll be devastated. I'll cry at the funeral. I'll talk about how much I loved her, how I'll never recover from this loss. No one will suspect a thing." "And if they do," Mariana pressed. "Then we have our alibi," Isabella interjected. "Carlos will be with me when it happens. We'll be here, together, at a family dinner just like this one. Lots of witnesses, and Elena will be somewhere else, somewhere alone, somewhere an accident can happen naturally." My hand was shaking. I gripped my fork tighter, forced myself to take another bite of food, to stay in character. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I wanted to stand up and throw the table over and demand to know how they could do this, how they could plan my murder so casually over dinner and tequila. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I stayed invisible. Because I knew that the moment I revealed I understood Spanish, the moment I showed my hand, I'd be in immediate danger. So I smiled blandly and took another sip of water and let them keep talking. "The timing needs to be perfect," Carlos said. "She just closed a big deal last week. $15 million property acquisition. Once we transfer everything after her death, we'll have enough to disappear if we need to. Move to Mexico, live like kings." "What about her family?" Rosa asked. "She has family, right?" Carlos shrugged. Her mother's been dead for years. Her father's dead. She's an only child. There's some distant cousins she barely talks to, a couple of business associates, but no one who will fight too hard for her estate. Especially once I start spreading rumors about how depressed she'd been, how the stress of the business was getting to her, how she'd been acting strange. He'd thought of everything, every angle, every contingency. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years, and I'd been completely oblivious, working hard to build a business my father had left me, supporting a husband and mother-in-law who were actively plotting my death. Isabella leaned over and patted Carlos's hand. "You've done so well, mijo," she said. "Keeping her happy, keeping her trusting. I know it hasn't been easy. She's not exactly your type, is she?" The table laughed. Everyone laughed at that, and Carlos grinned. "God, no," he said. "She's too skinny, too obsessed with work, too American. Remember that girl I was with before, Mama? Valentina? Now that was a woman. Curves, passion, knew how to take care of a man." "You'll find another Valentina when this is done," Isabella assured him. "A proper Mexican woman who knows her place, someone who'll give you children, not just business deals." Valentina. There was another woman. Before me or during me? Had my entire marriage been a lie? Had he been with someone else this whole time? "The only hard part is pretending to find her attractive," Carlos continued, and the cruelty in his voice was almost physical. "Having to touch her, having to pretend I enjoy it. Thank God that's gotten easier to avoid. I just say I'm tired, stressed. She believes everything I tell her. She's so desperate to believe in love, in marriage, in the fairy tale. It's pathetic." Mariana laughed. "How much longer do you have to keep up the act?" 6 months maximum, Carlos said. "We've already found someone to do it. A guy who specializes in this kind of thing. Makes it look like random violence, home invasion, wrong place, wrong time. Costs a lot, but it'll be worth it. And we've been moving money slowly so she doesn't notice all of it missing. By the time we're ready, we'll have everything in place." I had heard enough. I had heard more than enough. I couldn't sit at that table another minute without screaming, without breaking, without showing them that I'd understood every single word. I stood up slowly, smiled apologetically at the table. "Excuse me," I said in English. "I'm not feeling well. I think I need to lie down." Isabella jumped up, all fake concern. "Oh, mija, what's wrong? Was it something you ate?" I shook my head. "Just a headache," I said. "The work week was long. I just need to rest. Please continue your dinner. I'm so sorry." Carlos barely looked up. "Feel better," he said dismissively in English. In Spanish, he muttered to the table. "See? She can't even handle a simple family dinner. Weak constitution." They laughed as I left the room. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom on shaking legs, closed the door, locked it, and collapsed on the bathroom floor. I cried silently, my hand over my mouth to muffle the sounds. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the husband I thought loved me, for the life I'd built that was nothing but a carefully constructed trap. Then I stopped crying. I wiped my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and I made a decision. They wanted to destroy me. They wanted to take everything my father built and kill me for it. They wanted to plan my murder over dinner while I sat there like an idiot. Fine. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd assumed I was weak, stupid, easy to manipulate. They'd assumed I didn't speak Spanish and couldn't understand their plans. They were wrong, and I was going to make them regret every single word they'd said that night. I stayed in that bedroom for hours, hearing the dinner continue downstairs, hearing laughter and conversation, and eventually goodbyes as the extended family left. I heard Carlos tell his mother goodnight. I heard him come upstairs, try the bedroom door, find it locked. "Elena?" he called. "You okay in there?" "Still not feeling well," I called back, keeping my voice weak, playing the role. "I think I might be getting the flu. You should sleep in the guest room tonight. I don't want to get you sick." "Okay," he said, and I heard relief in his voice. Relief that he didn't have to pretend to care, didn't have to touch the wife he found repulsive. "Feel better. Let me know if you need anything." He left. I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, and I started planning. First thing I did was secure my phone. I went into my settings and changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, made sure Carlos couldn't access any of my devices or accounts remotely. Then I started documenting. I wrote down everything I'd heard that night. Every word, every name, every detail of their plan. I wrote down dates, times, the amounts of money that had been transferred from my accounts. I created a detailed timeline of every suspicious thing that had happened over the past 4 years. Then I started gathering evidence. I went through Carlos' laptop while he slept. He'd never changed his password from the default one I'd set up for him years ago. Stupid. I found emails to someone named Valentina, love letters, explicit photos, plans to meet. The emails went back 3 years. 3 years into our marriage, he'd been having an affair. I found financial records showing exactly where my money had gone. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Swiss banks, property purchases in Mexico under Isabella's name. They'd been systematically looting my inheritance, planning their escape with my money. I found searches in his browser history. Untraceable poisons. How to stage a home invasion. Hiring a hitman. Life insurance payout for accidental death. He'd been researching how to kill me for at least 8 months. Everything was there, documented in his own digital footprints. He'd been too confident, too certain I'd never think to look. I copied everything. I backed it up to encrypted cloud storage, to multiple USB drives that I hid in different locations. I created a detailed folder with every piece of evidence, every incriminating email, every financial transfer, every photograph. Then I started making calls. At 7:00 a.m. Saturday morning, I called my father's lawyer, Michael Chen. He'd been our family attorney for 20 years, had helped my father build Martinez properties, had been the executor of his estate. He was the one person I knew I could trust completely. "Michael," I said when he answered, "I need to see you immediately. Today, it's an emergency." 2 hours later, I was sitting in his office with my laptop, showing him everything I'd found. He sat there in silence, his face getting darker and darker as I walked him through the dinner conversation I'd overheard. The evidence of financial fraud, the plans to murder me. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Elena," he said, "you're in danger, immediate danger. If they know you've discovered this—" "They don't know," I said. "They think I don't speak Spanish. They think I'm stupid and blind and easy to manipulate, and we're going to use that to destroy them." Michael and I spent the entire weekend planning. He brought in a private investigator, a woman named Patricia Gomez, who specialized in fraud and murder-for-hire cases. She took my evidence, expanded on it, found even more connections. She discovered that Isabella had done this before. Carlos's real father hadn't died when he was young. He'd died 7 years ago in a suspicious car accident, right after changing his will to leave everything to Isabella. The police had investigated, but never found enough evidence to charge anyone. But Patricia found enough to establish a pattern. "They're professional," Patricia said. "This is how they operate. Isabella finds wealthy women for Carlos to target, he marries them, they drain the finances, and then the woman dies in an accident. You're not the first, Elena, but if we do this right, you'll be the last." By Monday morning, we had a plan. I would continue acting normal, continue pretending I didn't know anything. Meanwhile, Michael would freeze all my accounts that Carlos had access to, file emergency injunctions to prevent any further transfers, and start building a legal case. Patricia would gather more evidence, document Carlos's movements, identify the hitman he'd supposedly hired. And me? I would play the perfect oblivious wife. For a little longer, just long enough to gather the final pieces of evidence we needed to put them away forever. If this story is making your blood boil like mine was, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, the revenge gets so much better. Your support means everything to this channel. The next 6 weeks were the most terrifying of my life. I had to go home every night to a house where people were actively planning to kill me. I had to smile at Carlos over breakfast, kiss him goodbye when he left for the day, have dinner with Isabella, who was literally arranging my murder. But I did it. I played my role perfectly because I knew it was temporary, because I knew every day was one day closer to their complete destruction. Michael worked his magic in the courts. He filed emergency motions in secret proceedings, arguing I was in immediate danger. He got temporary restraining orders against Carlos and Isabella, got injunctions freezing all accounts, got court orders preventing them from accessing any of my assets. But here's the brilliant part. None of it was served yet. None of it was public record. They had no idea any of this was happening. Patricia documented everything. She followed Carlos to his meetings with Valentina, photographed them together, recorded conversations. She identified the hitman, a career criminal named Ray Martinez, no relation, who'd been in and out of prison for violent crimes. She recorded phone calls between Ray and Carlos, discussing payment, timing, methods. She found the smoking gun, a text message from Carlos to Ray saying, Do it on November 15th? She'll be alone at the house. Make it look like a break-in. I'll be with my mother, lots of witnesses. Payment on completion. November 15th was 3 weeks away. They'd set a date to kill me. They'd made it real, put it on the calendar like it was a business appointment, but we had them. We had everything we needed. And on November 14th, one day before they planned to kill me, we were going to take them down. I spent those weeks documenting their behavior, recording conversations, gathering evidence of their deception. I wore a hidden recording device whenever I was in Isabella's house. I captured Carlos on tape talking about how much longer he had to put up with me. I recorded Isabella coaching him on staying patient, reminding him that it would all be worth it soon. I also moved assets without them knowing. Michael helped me transfer property titles to a revocable trust I controlled, moved money to accounts in my name only, updated my will to leave everything to charity rather than to Carlos. If they succeeded in killing me, they'd find out too late that they'd get nothing. But they weren't going to succeed. Because on November 13th, we made our move. I came home from work that evening acting normal. Carlos and Isabella were in the kitchen, preparing dinner like it was any other night, like tomorrow wasn't the day they'd arranged to have me murdered. Elena, Isabella said warmly, "Come, sit. Dinner's almost ready." "Actually," I said, "I need to talk to you both about something." They exchanged glances. Carlos set down his drink. "What's wrong?" he asked. I smiled at them. Then I switched to perfect, fluent Spanish. "What's wrong? What's wrong is that I've known about your plan to kill me since September. I understood every word you said at that family dinner, every single word." You should have seen their faces. The color drained from Carlos's skin. Isabella dropped the spoon she was holding. It clattered on the floor, the only sound, the suddenly silent kitchen. "What?" Carlos stammered in English. "What are you talking about?" I continued in Spanish, my voice cold and steady. "I'm talking about how you planned my murder over dinner, how you've been stealing from me for years, how you've been cheating on me with Valentina, how you hired Ray Martinez to break into the house tomorrow night and kill me. Should I go on? Because I have recordings, Carlos. I have evidence. I have everything." Isabella found her voice first. "You're lying," she said, but her voice shook. "You don't speak Spanish. You never." "My mother's name was Maria Elena Garcia," I said. "I spent every summer with my abuela in San Antonio speaking nothing but Spanish. I'm completely fluent. I always have been. You just never bothered to ask." Carlos lunged toward me. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Touch me and I'll scream. The police are already on their way. They should be here in about 5 minutes. And here's what's going to happen. You're both going to be arrested for conspiracy to commit murder, for fraud, for embezzlement. Ray Martinez was arrested an hour ago, and he's already cooperating with investigators. He gave up everything, Carlos. The payment arrangements, the timeline, the plan. You're done." "Elena, please," Carlos started, his voice desperate. "Let me explain. I never meant to kill me." I laughed, and it was bitter and sharp. "You set a date, Carlos. November 15th. You hired someone. You planned it down to the last detail. You talked about how you'd cry at my funeral, how you'd play the devastated husband. Was any of it real? Any moment of our marriage?" He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. It had never been real. I had been a mark, a target, a walking bank account to be drained and disposed of. I heard sirens outside. The police were here. I had arranged this carefully with Detective Sarah Martinez. Again, no relation. Who'd been briefed on the entire case. She had arrest warrants ready. She had evidence packages prepared. She had everything she needed to make sure Carlos and Isabella Reyes would spend a very long time in prison. "One more thing," I said as the doorbell rang, as I heard heavy footsteps coming up the walkway. "Your father didn't die when you were young, did he, Carlos? He died 7 years ago, right after Isabella convinced him to change his will, and the police never had enough evidence to prove she killed him. But they have enough evidence now because the pattern is clear. You two have been doing this for years, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." The door burst open. Police flooded in. Detective Martinez was in front, badge held high. "Carlos Reyes, Isabella Reyes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." I watched them get handcuffed. I watched Carlos's face crumble as the reality of his situation sank in. I watched Isabella spit curses at me in Spanish, calling me every name she could think of. I understood every word, and I smiled. One more thing, I said to Carlos as they led him toward the door. I filed for divorce this morning, and thanks to the prenuptial agreement you insisted on, the one that says you get nothing in case of infidelity or criminal activity, you'll walk away with exactly what you deserve. Nothing. He tried to say something, but the detective pushed him forward. They took them both away, and I stood in that kitchen in the house where they'd planned my death, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Carlos and Isabella were denied bail. The evidence was too strong, the flight risk too high. They sat in county jail waiting for trial while I dismantled their lives piece by piece. Patricia's investigation uncovered two other wealthy women, who'd died suspiciously after marrying men connected to Isabella Reyes. Both cases were reopened. Both cases now had enough evidence to move forward. Ray Martinez, the hitman, took a plea deal. He testified against Carlos in exchange for a reduced sentence. He gave prosecutors detailed information about how Carlos had approached him, how much he'd been promised, what the plan had been. His testimony was devastating. The financial forensics team I hired traced every stolen dollar, $847,000 in total over 4 years. Money that Carlos and Isabella had systematically transferred from my accounts to offshore holdings. All of it was recovered. All of it came back to me. Valentina, the mistress, came forward when news of the arrests hit the papers. She claimed she hadn't known Carlos was married, that he'd told her he was single. I didn't believe her, but I didn't care enough to pursue it. Carlos had used her the same way he'd used me, just without the murder plot. She was welcome to whatever damage he'd done to her life. The trial was a media sensation. Wealthy heiress nearly murdered by husband and mother-in-law for inheritance. It had everything. Love, betrayal, murder for hire, international intrigue. I testified for 4 hours, laying out the entire story in detail, the dinner conversation I'd overheard, the evidence I'd gathered, the planning, the patience, the slow realization that my life was in danger. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Carlos and Isabella guilty on all counts. Carlos got 35 years for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Isabella got 40 years for the same crimes, plus the reopened investigation into her husband's death added another 20 years. She's 68 years old. She'll die in prison. Carlos tried to appeal. His lawyers argued entrapment, argued that he never actually intended to go through with it, argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Every appeal was denied. He's currently in a maximum security prison in Texas. I hope he thinks about me every single day. I hope he remembers the wife he thought was too stupid to understand Spanish, too trusting to question his lies, too weak to fight back. I sold Isabella's house the day I legally could, donated the money to domestic violence charities. I didn't want a single dollar that had anything to do with that family. The restaurants went bankrupt within 6 months without Isabella to run them. They were built on her money, her family's money, and money they'd stolen from their victims. Without that stolen fortune, they collapsed. Good riddance. As for me, I'm thriving. Martinez Properties is doing better than ever. I expanded into new markets, hired an amazing team, built something my father would be proud of. I moved into a beautiful penthouse downtown, hired top-tier security, started living the life I was always meant to live. I'm dating someone new now. His name is James, and he's a forensic accountant I met through all of this. He helped untangle Carlos's fraudulent financial records. He's honest, kind, transparent. He thinks my fluency in Spanish is sexy. He actually knows me, knows my history, asks about my mother and my grandmother and my heritage. The trust issues are real. I won't pretend they aren't. I second guess everything, question every motive, look for ulterior reasons behind every kind gesture. But I'm working on it. Therapy helps. Time helps. Building a life that's truly mine, not tied to anyone else's agenda, helps most of all. I think about that dinner sometimes. That moment when I realized what was happening, when I heard my husband casually planning my death while I sat there invisible. The terror of that moment, but also the clarity, the absolute crystalline clarity that came from finally seeing the truth. They thought they were so smart. They thought they'd found the perfect mark. The rich gringa who didn't understand Spanish, who didn't pay attention to finances, who was too in love to see reality. They thought I'd be easy. They were wrong, and that mistake cost them everything. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story gave you the justice you needed to see, check out the other videos on screen. They're just as satisfying. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? See you in the next story. I'm Elena Martinez. I'm 31 years old, and I'm the woman who survived because she stayed quiet, listened carefully, and never revealed her hand until the perfect moment. They wanted to make me a victim. Instead, I made them regret they ever met me. My advice? Trust your instincts, pay attention to the details, and never ever let anyone convince you that you don't understand what's right in front of your face. The truth is always there. You just have to be brave enough to see it. 6 months after Carlos and Isabella were sentenced, I was sitting in my new penthouse, watching the sunset over Dallas when my phone rang. It was Detective Sarah Martinez. "Elena," she said, "I thought you'd want to know. We just got confirmation from the Mexican authorities. They've reopened 5 more cases, 5 more suspicious deaths connected to Isabella's extended family network. Your case broke open something much bigger than we initially realized. 5 more women, 5 more victims who'd trusted the wrong people, who'd married into a family that saw them as nothing more than walking bank accounts. Women who'd died thinking it was bad luck, random violence, terrible accidents. Women whose families had grieved without ever knowing the truth." "Are there any living victims?" I asked. "Anyone else who got away?" "We're investigating 3 potential current targets," Sarah said. "Women married to men in Isabella's network who fit the pattern. We're contacting them now, warning them, offering protection. Because of you, Elena, we might save their lives." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking about those women, thinking about how close I'd come to being just another name on a list, another mysterious death, another case that went cold because no one suspected the truth. I'd gotten lucky. Lucky that I spoke Spanish, lucky that I'd been at that dinner, lucky that I'd had the resources and the support to fight back. But luck shouldn't be what saves you from murder. And that's why I decided to do something I'd been considering for months. I started a foundation, the Maria Elena Foundation, named after my mother, dedicated to helping women identify and escape financial abuse and domestic danger. We offer free legal services, private investigators, secure housing, and financial counseling. We work with law enforcement to identify patterns of abuse and fraud. We teach women to recognize red flags, to trust their instincts, to document evidence. The foundation launched 3 months ago. We've already helped 47 women. 47 women who saw something suspicious in their marriages, their finances, their lives, and didn't ignore it. 47 women who trusted their gut instead of their partner's lies. One of them, a woman named Rachel, came to us because her husband had started acting exactly like Carlos did. The sudden phone password changes, the unexplained financial transfers, the distant behavior. She couldn't prove anything concrete, but something felt wrong. Our investigators found everything. Her husband was moving money to offshore accounts. He'd taken out $1 million life insurance policy on her without her knowledge. He'd been researching accidental death scenarios. We got her out, got her somewhere safe, got the evidence to prosecutors. He's in jail now awaiting trial. "You saved my life," Rachel told me when we met in person. "If I'd ignored those feelings, if I'd told myself I was being paranoid like he kept saying, I'd be dead in 6 months. That's why I do this, because women's intuition isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. It's our subconscious picking up on inconsistencies, lies, dangers that our conscious mind wants to explain away. We're taught not to trust ourselves, not to make waves, not to accuse without absolute proof. And that's exactly what predators count on. Not anymore. Not for the women who come to us. The trial had been brutal, but necessary. I want to tell you about the moment when Carlos finally broke, when the mask he'd worn for so many years finally shattered completely. It was day 12 of the trial. The prosecution had been methodical, laying out evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable case. Financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from Ray Martinez, the hitman, testimony from Valentina, the mistress, testimony from me. Carlos had sat through it all with this blank expression, like none of it could touch him. His lawyers tried to paint him as a man who'd been confused, who'd made mistakes but never actually intended to harm anyone. They tried to suggest I'd misunderstood the dinner conversation, that my Spanish wasn't as good as I claimed, that I'd taken things out of context. Then the prosecution played the recording. I'd been wearing a wire for 3 weeks before the arrests, recording every conversation in Isabella's house. Patricia had insisted on it, said we needed Carlos on tape admitting to the plan. So one evening, 2 weeks before the scheduled murder date, I'd prompted him. I'd come home and said I was worried about a break-in in our neighborhood, that I was scared being home alone so much. And Carlos, my loving husband, had hugged me and told me not to worry. "Nothing's going to happen to you," he'd said in English, comforting me. Then after I'd gone upstairs, he'd called his mother. The call was recorded, his voice clear as day. She's getting paranoid about break-ins. That's perfect for us. When it happens, everyone will think she had a premonition, that she was worried about the exact thing that killed her. It'll seem like tragic irony instead of planning. We keep the date. November 15th. Ray knows what to do. The courtroom was dead silent as the recording played. I watched Carlos' face. I watched the exact moment he realized there was no explanation, no excuse, no way to spin this. His lawyers looked defeated. The jury looked horrified. But it was what came next that really destroyed him. The prosecution called Valentina to the stand. She'd been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She walked up there, beautiful and composed, and she told the truth. I met Carlos 3 years ago, she said. He told me he was divorced, that his wife had been cold and distant, that the marriage had ended badly. I believed him. We started dating. He was romantic, attentive, generous. He said he loved me. When did you learn he was still married? The prosecutor asked. When I saw his arrest on the news, Valentina said, and her voice broke. I called his phone and a Detective Martinez answered. She told me everything, that he was married to Elena, that they were living together, that he'd been with both of us this entire time. I felt sick. I felt like I'd been part of something horrible without knowing it. Did Mr. Reyes ever discuss his wife with you? Valentina hesitated, then nodded. Yes. He called her his golden goose. He said she was rich and stupid and completely blind to what was happening. He said she was so desperate for love that she'd believe anything. He laughed about it, about how easy it was to manipulate her. I sat in the gallery, listening to this woman describe my husband's contempt for me, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Every word she spoke was another nail in his coffin. Did he ever discuss plans for the future? The prosecutor asked. He said that soon we'd have enough money to live anywhere we wanted, Valentina said. That there was going to be a windfall, and then we could be together openly. I thought he meant a business deal or an inheritance. I didn't know he meant... She stopped, looked directly at Carlos. I didn't know he was planning to murder you. That's when Carlos broke. He stood up, ignoring his lawyers trying to pull him down, and he shouted, She wanted too much. She was always working, always focused on business, always trying to control everything. I gave her 4 years of my life, and she couldn't even give me access to what should have been mine. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Carlos' lawyers were on their feet trying to control their client. But Carlos kept going, everything spilling out in a rage he couldn't contain anymore. I played the perfect husband. I pretended to love her, to care about her boring business stories, to want her. Do you know how hard that was? She wasn't even my type, and she had everything, and wouldn't share it properly. My mother and I, we deserved that money more than she did. We would have actually appreciated it. Mr. Reyes, sit down, the judge ordered. But Carlos was past listening. She walked around acting so superior, so smart, running her daddy's company like she'd built it herself. She inherited everything and acted like she'd earned it. We were just taking what should have been shared, what any decent wife would have given to her husband. His lawyers finally got him back in his seat, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the real Carlos Reyes, the entitled, narcissistic man who believed he deserved my inheritance more than I did. The man who thought playing the role of loving husband for 4 years entitled him to murder me for my assets. The next day, the jury convicted him on all counts. When the verdict was read, Carlos didn't react. He just sat there, staring at nothing, finally understanding that his performance was over and the consequences were real. At sentencing, the judge looked at Carlos with undisguised disgust. You are a predator, she said. You deliberately targeted a woman for her wealth, married her under false pretenses, systematically stole from her, and planned her murder with the same casual attitude most people bring to planning a vacation. You showed no remorse, no recognition of her humanity. You viewed her as an object, an obstacle between you and money you felt entitled to. She gave him 35 years. With good behavior, he'd be eligible for parole in 25. He'd be almost 60 years old. His entire life wasted on greed. Isabella got it worse. At her sentencing, prosecutors presented evidence from the reopened cases. 2 other women, both married to men in Isabella's family network, both dead in suspicious accidents, both leaving their wealth to their husbands. The pattern was undeniable. You ran a murder-for-hire family business, the judge said. You groomed your son to be a predator. You identified targets, planned murders, and profited from death. You are one of the most dangerous criminals I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. 40 years for conspiracy to commit murder. 20 years for the probable murder of her husband. Sentences to run consecutively. Isabella Reyes would die in prison. She was taken away, screaming in Spanish that I was a witch, a demon, that I'd destroyed her family. No, I thought, watching her go. You destroyed your family. I just refused to be your victim. The civil suits came next. I sued Carlos and Isabella for every dollar they'd stolen, plus damages for emotional distress, fraud, and attempted murder. Their lawyers tried to argue they had no assets to pay with. But we found everything. The offshore accounts, the property in Mexico, the hidden cash, the jewelry, the cars. We found it all and we took it all. The total recovery was $1.2 million, more than they'd stolen because we included assets they'd acquired from previous victims. I donated every penny to the foundation, blood money that would now save lives instead of ending them. I also sued the company Carlos had worked for. They'd failed to do proper background checks, failed to notice his expense report fraud, failed to protect their employees from a predator in their ranks. We settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. That money went to the foundation, too. Valentina tried to reach out to me several times after the trial. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make amends for being part of my nightmare. I understood she'd been a victim, too, manipulated and deceived just like I was. But I couldn't. I couldn't sit across from the woman Carlos had actually wanted, the woman he'd actually been attracted to, the woman he'd planned to run away with using my money. I wrote her a letter instead. I told her I didn't blame her, that I knew she hadn't known the truth, that I hoped she healed from this too. But I also told her I couldn't be part of her healing journey. She needed to find her own path forward, just like I was finding mine. She wrote back, thanking me for the grace I'd shown her. She said she'd moved back to Mexico, started over with her family, was in therapy, working through trust issues and guilt. She said she'd never forget what almost happened, would never stop feeling sick about her unwitting role in it. I hoped that was true. I hoped she learned from this the same way I had. The hardest part of the aftermath wasn't the legal battles or the media attention or the fear that Carlos might somehow reach me from prison. It was facing my own family, my friends, everyone who'd watched me be happy with Carlos and never suspected the truth. My cousin Maria was the first to visit after everything went public. She came to my penthouse with tears in her eyes and hugged me for 5 solid minutes. I thought he was perfect for you, she sobbed. I told you at your wedding how lucky you were. I celebrated him. I helped you choose him a birthday gift 2 months ago. How did I not see it? He was good at lying, I told her. That's how he made his living. You couldn't have known. But she wasn't the only one carrying guilt. Friend after friend called or visited, expressing shock and horror. They'd known Carlos, liked him, thought he was devoted to me. Some had noticed small things, his occasional dismissiveness, his lack of interest in my work, but chalked it up to normal. Relationship dynamics. No one suspected murder. We're taught to mind our own business, my friend Jennifer said. Even when we see red flags, we tell ourselves it's not our place to judge someone else's marriage. But what if that silence enables abuse? What if by not saying something, we let predators operate freely? She had a point, and that became another mission of the foundation, teaching people to speak up when they see warning signs, not with judgment, but with care. Creating a culture where concern for someone's safety outweighs social politeness. My mother's family in San Antonio had the hardest time processing it all. My abuela, the woman who taught me Spanish, who'd given me the very tool that saved my life, cried when I visited her. Mija, she said, holding my face in her weathered hands. Your mother, she knew you needed Spanish. She knew you needed to understand the world in both languages. She protected you even after she was gone. I thought about that a lot. My mother had died when I was 16, long before I met Carlos. But her insistence that I learn Spanish, that I connect with my heritage, that I understand my abuela's language and stories, that gift had literally saved my life. She'd given me a tool I didn't know I'd need until the moment I needed it most. The nightmares came for months after the arrests. I'd dream I was back at that dinner table, understanding every word, but unable to move or speak. I'd dream Carlos was in my house, standing over my bed. I'd dream the hitman had succeeded, that November 15th had come and I'd been alone and defenseless. I'd wake up gasping, reaching for a phone to call 911, taking several moments to remember I was safe. Carlos was in prison. Isabella was in prison. I had top-tier security, cameras everywhere, a doorman who vetted every visitor. No one was coming to hurt me. But trauma doesn't listen to logic. My therapist, Dr. Sandra Wu, helped me understand that my nervous system had been in survival mode for so long that it didn't know how to relax. We worked through EMDR therapy, processing the trauma, teaching my body that the danger had passed. You're not crazy for being afraid, Dr. Wu told me. You discovered your husband was planning to murder you. That's not something you just get over. Healing takes time. She was right. It took a year before I could sleep through the night, consistently. 18 months before I could be alone in a quiet house without panic. 2 years before I could hear Spanish spoken suddenly without my heart racing. But I healed. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. I healed. James, my forensic accountant boyfriend, who'd helped untangle Carlos's fraudulent finances, was patient through all of it. He never pushed, never demanded more than I could give, never made me feel broken for needing time. "I'm not going anywhere," he'd say when I'd panic about whether I could trust again. "Take all the time you need. I'm here." 6 months into dating, I finally told him I loved him. We were having dinner at my place, and he made a joke about my security system being more complex than a bank vault. I laughed and said, "Well, the last man who had access to my life tried to kill me, so I'm a little cautious." He got serious then, set down his fork, looked at me directly. "Elena," he said, "I know what happened to you was horrific. I know trusting anyone after that is incredibly difficult. But I need you to hear this. I see you. Not your money, not your business, not what you can do for me. I see you, your strength, your intelligence, your humor, your heart. That's what I'm here for, nothing else." That's when I knew. That's when I understood what real love looked like. It wasn't Carlos's performance of devotion. It wasn't grand gestures or expensive gifts or charming words. It was this: a man who understood my trauma and didn't ask me to get over it faster, who valued me for who I was, not what I had, who showed up consistently, honestly, without an agenda. "I love you," I said. First time I'd said it to anyone since Carlos. First time I meant it completely. James smiled, reached across the table, took my hand. "I love you too," he said, "and I promise you I will never give you a reason to doubt that." He hasn't. 2 years later, he still hasn't. Last month, I got a letter from Carlos. Prison mail, addressed to me at the foundation. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, rambling. He apologized profusely, said he'd been in therapy, said he understood now how wrong he'd been. He said he'd been raised by a manipulative mother, that he'd never learned healthy relationships, that he'd been conditioned to see women as resources rather than people. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he understood the magnitude of what he'd done, that he was genuinely remorseful, that he wished he could undo it all. I read the letter 3 times. Then I wrote back. Just 1 page. "Carlos," I wrote, "I appreciate that you're working on yourself in prison. I hope you do become a better person genuinely, but that's for you and your conscience, not for me. I don't forgive you. What you did was too calculated, too cruel, too sustained to be dismissed as a mistake or poor upbringing. You actively chose to deceive me, steal from me, and plan my murder every single day for months. Those were choices. Your choices. And I hope you live with them for the rest of your life. I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because I refuse to absolve you to make you feel better. You don't get to clear your conscience at my expense. You don't get to use my forgiveness as part of your redemption story. What you can do is this: warn other men. Tell your story in prison. Make sure every inmate who will listen knows that predatory behavior destroys lives, including your own. Make sure they understand that the women they see as targets are human beings who will fight back. Make sure they know I won. That's your redemption if you want one. Not my forgiveness, but your honest testimony about the consequences of seeing women as objects. I've moved on, Carlos. I have a life you never deserved to be part of. I have a foundation saving lives you tried to end. I have love from someone who actually knows what that word means. I have peace. You have time to think about what you lost. Use it wisely. Elena." I never heard from him again. I don't know if my letter made an impact or if he simply understood I'd never give him what he wanted. Either way, I meant what I said. His redemption wasn't my responsibility. My healing was. 3 years after that dinner party, the Maria Elena Foundation has helped over 200 women. 200 women who trusted their instincts, who reached out for help, who refused to be victims. Some were in immediate danger like I was. Others caught the warning signs early: the financial control, the isolation, the gradual erosion of independence that predators use to trap their targets. We've worked with law enforcement in 12 states to identify patterns of financial abuse and murder-for-hire schemes. We've helped secure convictions in 8 cases directly related to Isabella's extended network. The Mexican authorities estimate the family was responsible for at least 15 deaths over 30 years. 15 women who married the wrong man and paid with their lives. Because of my case, because I survived and fought back, those women's families finally have answers. Their deaths have been reclassified from accidents to homicides. Their killers are facing justice decades late, but finally. That matters to me. It matters that my survival meant something beyond my own life. It matters that the worst night of my life became the catalyst for saving others. I spoke at a domestic violence prevention conference last month. 500 people in attendance, mostly women, many of them survivors themselves. I told my story, start to finish. The fairy tale beginning, the subtle red flags, the dinner party revelation, the systematic gathering of evidence, the legal battle, the aftermath. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one woman stood and started clapping. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding. Not for me specifically, but for all of us. For every woman who'd trusted her instincts. For every woman who'd fought back. For every woman who'd survived. After my speech, dozens of women came up to share their stories. One woman said her husband had been pressuring her to increase her life insurance. Another said her partner had suddenly become interested in her family's inheritance. Another said her boyfriend had asked her to add him to her business accounts for convenience. I thought I was being paranoid, she said. But after hearing your story, I realize I'm being smart. I'm going to trust my gut. Yes, I told her. Trust your gut, always. It's trying to protect you. That's what I want people to understand from my story. Your intuition isn't paranoia. Your discomfort isn't being dramatic. Your questions aren't insulting someone who loves you. They're survival instincts that have been honed over thousands of years of human evolution. They're your subconscious picking up on patterns, inconsistencies, dangers that your conscious mind wants to explain away. Listen to them. Trust them. They might save your life. I think about who I was 3 years ago sometimes. The woman who sat at that dinner table hearing her murder being planned and somehow found the strength to stay quiet and stay smart. I'm proud of her. She could have panicked, could have revealed what she knew, could have put herself in immediate danger, but she didn't. She played the long game, gathered evidence, built an ironclad case. That woman saved my life. She was me at my strongest, my most strategic, my most determined. She refused to be a victim, even when everything in her life was designed to make her one. I carry her with me now. When I'm afraid, when I doubt myself, when I wonder if I can handle something, I remember. I sat through dinner with people planning my murder and smiled through dessert. I lived in a house with a husband actively arranging my death and maintained the perfect facade. I gathered evidence against trained criminals and never got caught. If I could do that, I can do anything. That's the legacy of that terrible night. Not just survival, but the absolute certainty of my own strength. The knowledge that I can face the worst humanity has to offer and come out fighting. Carlos tried to take everything from me, my money, my life, my trust, my ability to love. He failed on every count. I kept my wealth and used it to help others. I kept my life and made it meaningful. I learned to trust again, carefully but genuinely. And I learned to love again, with someone worthy of it. He lost everything he valued. His freedom, his reputation, his future, his mother, his dreams. He sits in a cell now with nothing but time to think about his choices. I hope those thoughts haunt him. I hope he lies awake at night remembering the dinner where he laughed about how stupid I was, how easy I'd be to kill. I hope he replays the moment in court when I testified about understanding every word of his plan. I hope he remembers the look on my face when they took him away in handcuffs. I hope he knows, with absolute certainty, that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life. As for me, I'm living my best life. I run a multi-million-dollar company. I operate a foundation that saves lives. I wake up next to a man who loves me for exactly who I am. I speak Spanish whenever I want, proud of my heritage, grateful for the gift my mother gave me. I have security and peace and purpose. I am everything Carlos tried to destroy. And I'm thriving. That's my final message to anyone listening to this story. To anyone who's ever been underestimated, manipulated, targeted, or abused. You are stronger than they think. You are smarter than they believe. You are capable of surviving and thriving despite their worst efforts. Trust yourself. Gather your evidence. Build your case. Fight back with everything you have. And when you win, and you will win, use that victory to help others do the same. The predators of the world count on our silence, our compliance, our unwillingness to believe the people we love could hurt us. They count on us doubting ourselves, explaining away the red flags, choosing hope over reality. Don't give them that power. Stay alert, stay smart, and never ever let anyone convince you that your instincts are wrong. I'm Elena Martinez. I'm 34 years old now. 3 years ago, my husband tried to have me murdered for my inheritance. He failed. I won. And I've spent every day since making sure other women win too. This is my story, my complete story, from the perfect fairy tale beginning to the nightmare revelation, to the hard-fought victory, to the healing and purpose that came after. I survived because I spoke Spanish. I won because I stayed quiet. I thrived because I refused to let evil win. And if you're out there right now, sitting with that feeling in your gut that something's wrong, that voice in your head saying, pay attention, that instinct telling you to investigate, listen to it, listen to yourself, trust yourself. You might just save your own life. Thank you for hearing my story. Thank you for staying until the very end. I hope it helps someone out there realize they're not crazy, they're not paranoid, they're not overreacting, they're survivors in the making. Stay safe, stay aware, and always, always trust yourself. This is Elena Martinez, signing off for the last time. May you never need the lessons I learned, but if you do, may you remember my story and know that you can survive anything, peace and strength and justice. Always justice.